Hello audience, my name is Dalton Mortimer and I am the Authenticator, and welcome back to A Mystic's Vlogs, a show where we take a relatively serious look at media with explicit, fantastical or supernatural elements through a magical, mystical, mythological, folkloric, paranormal, or occultic lens. And also, incidentally, welcome back to our coverage of Netflix's new Sabrina show, with Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, Episode 2, The Dark Baptism. Before we get too far stuck into this, I feel it's necessary to point out that I noticed between this episode and the last episode that if this were a more conventional series, this probably would have been a two-part pilot rather than a simple 2 episodes in an ongoing series that is bingeable because, well, Netflix. Because it's very obvious that the story that is contained within this episode and the previous episode very much would have been a two-part pilot, very much in the same vein as the pilot and Thing You Love Most from Once Upon a Time, and so on. That's really neither here nor there, just something I noticed. But, without any further ado, let's get stuck into this. Take it away, Sabrina. We'll see what the power of two can do. We open, and I've already got a little bit of cleanup to do, because I don't know if you guys noticed, but by the end of the last episode, despite the fact that I genuinely kind of liked the first couple episodes in this series, going through it with a fine-tooth comb left me a bit drained, a little bit like downing an entire bottle of vodka thinking it's water, and then suddenly passing the fuck out when it finally hits you. Unlike the bitter, bad dime store whiskey flavor of, let's say, the Fairy Godmother episode of this season of Legends of Tomorrow, which left me with a lot of substance to dissect and mostly just pissed me off by the end of it. By contrast, towards the end of the last episode of Sabrina, I was spazzing and waffling like a motherfucker and some substance got lost in the scuffle. Not to mention, by that point in the previous episode, the episode of covering it for this series was pushing the back end of the 30s minute-wise, and I just decided to end it rather than babbling. The missing substance in question has to do with the high priest of this particular coven of witches, Faustus Blackwood, who is used to set up a lazy cliffhanger, which is why I suggest that it's probably the case that this was meant to be a two-part pilot under normal circumstances. Faustus is brought in at the behest of Hilda and Zelda when Sabrina expresses doubts about taking her dark baptism in the first place, and apparently the entire coven freaks the fuck out since the high priest shows up, which apparently is a big deal because it's made of a big deal later in the episode. And yes, for the record, I appreciated the literature reference in the form of Faust, given that I once did a comparative essay between the Marlowe version and the Gautier version in college, so it was a little bit nostalgic tripping for me. But this Faust is not the original Faust, as much as I would like to have that be the case, given especially how long-lived these particular witches tend to be. It would have been nice to have this be the original Faust, but for reasons we'll get into in episode 3, I don't think that's the case, because stupid plot contrivance bullshit. It's probably ultimately for the better, though, because this Faust is an idiot. We'll get into that as we continue on, which we should probably do, considering I've waffled on already about 5 minutes. Beginning the idiocy, he immediately starts by going on and on and on about how special she is. And if Sabrina didn't have the self-awareness of a clump of clay in this scene, she might have caught on to the sinister machinations of this overall series much sooner, and we wouldn't have a plot. Or at the very least, she could get one over on the proverbial Dark Lord, as it were. But, alas, she does, for the purposes of this scene, have the self-awareness of a piece of clay, so damn. Secondly, he goes on about the church's dogma. And slight reservation here, for one. Yes, you are a religion, and that's fine. Religions have dogma. But you are a magic-based religion. You can literally summon up spirits. Hell, most of you apparently have a goblin on the payroll for fuck's sake. That was the whole point of the whole familiar subplot in the previous episode. So, why go with this, oh, this morality is all entirely theoretical and we don't have anyone to ask, when you can literally conjure up shit, as stated in the next couple of episodes when she takes a conjuring class at the fucking pseudo-break bills. Jesus Christ, I hate this. And yes, the free will line he gives her is more in line with what Satanists and Luciferians actually think, given that they see him as a sort of animalistic archetype of, hedonism and free will and yada yada yada. But still, damn, that's stupid. She has practical questions about the ownership of her soul, and you decide to lie, which is fine because, father of lies and all that. But you lie so horribly that you immediately set yourself up to fail in the end of the episode. I am going to rant about this later, but just keep this in your mind. He lies sloppily, and because he lies sloppily, and she is self-aware enough to realize he's lying when he's lying at the end of the episode, he basically causes this entire hoopla. Granted, if you didn't lie, she probably wouldn't have taken the dark baptism in the first place. However, if you had just reworded the vows a little bit when you were giving her dark baptism, you wouldn't have this problem in the first place. Now, would you? You stupid fuck. And you call yourself a Faustus. Please. Being evil and manipulative is one thing, but if you're going to bother with being evil and manipulative, do it right. For fuck's sake, have a little pride, man. You've apparently been doing this for centuries here, so what the fuck, mate? This is rookie bullshit you're pulling. Have you no dignity among villains, you... Ugh. I'm officially on Lilith's team. This guy sucks as a villain, and... Ugh. Fuck. Speaking of the better villain, she shows up again when the cartoonishly oversimplified football players start doing stupid shit again, because of course she does. And she entreats Sabrina to do some cooperative spell work with the Weird Sisters through, subterfuge and whatnot. Which is where it gets confusing. The Weird Sisters being, of course, the three that put the blood curse on her in the previous episode. I only mention it because I think I neglected to name them last time, because by that time I was starting to fray a little bit. Even putting aside the fact that they cursed her in the previous episode, why wouldn't Sabrina just ask Hilda, Zelda, and Ambrose? I mean, they're three magically inclined individuals who not only would be more inclined to help her, but would also be more inclined to understand that she doesn't actually intend to maim or kill anyone, whereas the Weird Sisters are a bit bloodthirsty. I'm willing to excuse the curse, because of course, it might just be the magical equivalent of hazing and pranking in this context, and this show does have a bit of a Addams Family style humor to it sometimes, so fine, but still. That's not the really confusing part, though. No, that I can get behind. The really confusing part is how she tries to go about summoning them. See, for one thing, she goes about summoning them like they're spirits or fae or some shit, as opposed to fellow witches, which would make sense if she was actually trying to go ahead and summon the, Weird Sisters from Shakespearean or mythological use, or if she was summoning the Three Fates, for example. But A, she has to summon them in the first place, given their fellow witches, and B, how she goes about doing it is through this quasi-Celtic hedge magic charm that I'm somewhat familiar with the use of, and never in all my years of studying this shit have I ever seen it used in summoning. I've seen it used in love spells, I've seen it used in binding spells, I've seen it used in various different applications, but never a summoning. And that's a little bit weird. Granted, I get that they had to kind of give her an excuse to use some kind of hedge magic witchcraft, because that seems to be the modus operandi of most of the spells in this show is low magical hedge magic. So fine, but you couldn't have picked a better example, like no sigils or anything. No, okay, you're just gonna go with the quasi Celtic hedge magic charm that's never been used for what you're trying to use it for. Alrighty then, moving on. Anyway, they banter about a bit, and then we get into the next problem. Namely, that for all of the getting a group together and using their power to help each other thing that they're establishing here, there isn't actually a hell of a lot of cooperative spell work here. Most of what they do is stuff they could have done on their own. I guess, she needed 4 people to, seduce 4 people, and that's fine and dandy, but in terms of spell work, no, they could have each done this individually if they wanted to, and there was really no point in the whole we need to form a group other than that Lilith and the guys of Miss Wardwell had suggested it. So the fuck, I guess they're leaving that thread hanging like a string off of a torn ball of yarn. I suspect that this was just to establish the possibility of the weird sisters in a more sympathetic light, so that they're not total villains or total bitches. And also to have a tormenting the bullies because reasons montage like in The Craft, because, ooh, my edgy witchcraft analogy, ooh, derp. Though there is a funny bit where the weird sisters decide to take the sexual potency of the football players for, shits and giggles, and that's all well and good. And by the way, can I just say how just pathetic these guys looked? These actors they hired to play these apparently, Cro-Magnon style football players. Like, they look like they're just too damn skinny. If you're gonna do this, at least give me some eye candy to play with, why don't you? For fuck's sake. Especially given that these are supposed to be the school's golden boys, and I can tell you from experience, given that I, remember high school and remember being attracted to exactly that kind of guy in high school, yeah, these guys would have gotten beat up by most of the people in the chess club at my school. So, yeah, that's kind of pathetic. If you're going to make them these hyper toxically masculine, air quotes, super athletes, then at least make them fit the part. This is a casting error, if anything, but fuck me, I can't help but think it's at least a little bit something to do with social justice. Like, okay, we need to depict the most stereotypically toxically masculine motherfuckers we can find, but we can't actually show proper masculinity because that would mean, giving a voice to this kind of toxic masculinity, and we can't do that. Herp, derp, 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 derp. I know I said the social justice doesn't usually bother me, but for one thing, this offends me as a gay person because I don't have any eye candy to look at, and for another, this is just a farce now because Harvey is, an artist type, so he gets off being, skinny and nerdy and whatnot, but, like, these guys are supposed to be the most stereotypical slack-jawed hillbilly jocks you can think of, and all they were is, basically Edward Cullen cosplayers. And he's the skinny one of those two. So, the fuck. And yes, I'm aware I just made a Twilight reference. What of it? Anyway, brief and irrelevant interlude, motivated mostly by my desire to see hot guys on screen. Over. That takes us up to the Dark Baptism. Once we skip over Sabrina's waffling and pining over, oh, my friends, oh, my family, so on and so on and so on, melodramatically because teen show. And I don't care, and it doesn't really have any relevance to the plot other than stereotypical, I don't want to, but I should, no I shouldn't, wait, oh I should, oh I shouldn't, back and forth constantly. So, yeah, that, I believe, takes us up to the Dark Baptism. I will check my timestamp, which I believe that takes us up to the Dark Baptism once you skip over all the irrelevant bullshit. Aside from Hilda and Zelda ripping off Cain and Abel with the whole, I'm going to kill you because you pissed me off, oh, you're fine because immortality thing. Which I already covered in the previous episode, and yes, it pisses me off still, because this show does not deserve to wipe the ass of Neil Gaiman's Sandman mythos. Simply put. Let's just get that out of the way right now. And while we're here on this slight side quest, I should point out that at one point Sabrina tries yet again to loosely allude to her witch background to Harvey, and she uses comic books as an analogy for it. And I don't know whether to blame her or to blame him, but Sabrina, my darling, there are magic-based superheroes you could use for this. Doctor Strange, Shazam, etc., etc. You don't have to be vague about the powers. You could have literally said magic-based powers, and Harvey probably would have just nodded at you, assuming that it isn't his mistake that he didn't call this out. Either way, you both need to turn in your geek cards on my desk by Monday morning. End of story. Okay, well, on with the show. Or I guess I should say, on with the baptism. Under a fully eclipsing blood moon, etc., etc., written in blood, so on and so on. Which, speaking of, I guess I could go into the ins and outs of why it is that such alignments are important, and the importance of blood magic of this particular kind. The blood moon, which is to say the fourth full moon in a single lunar cycle, is typically considered to be the moon at its most powerful. Lunar energy being synonymous with passive power, femininity, healing, etc. The blood moon being as well, it's the moon at its most powerful, hypersaturates the world at large in this kind of energy. An eclipse is an even matching, of course, between lunar energy and solar energy being the active masculine energy as well. So a eclipsed blood moon is essentially magically perfect for any kind of hyperdimensional working that involves a lot of invocation or higher dimensional or lower dimensional summoning and so forth. Thus, it would in fact be the perfect time for this kind of initiation insofar as it was a proper initiation of any kind. The reason why the dark baptism of this particular kind is written in blood goes back to the Middle Ages, where it was said that witches wrote in the devil's book in blood to bind their souls to him, mostly by virtue of the energy that is typically contained in blood. See, physical attributes of a person become hypersaturated within their own life energy, and if you are a skilled magic user, you can trace this spark of life energy back to its original source, thereby essentially binding them in the same way that a remote control controls whatever its antenna is hooked up to, and so on and so forth. Thus, by allowing herself to write in the Devil's Black Book, she essentially binds her soul to him for eternity. Anyway, back to the plot, because that's really all that needs to be said about that. This is where Blackwood's idiocy really gets under my skin, because he sold this to her in terms of free will, and did not think ahead of perhaps tweaking the ritual vows in any significant detail. So he sold her free will, and then started babbling on incessantly about servitude. And don't think, show, that I didn't catch the little nod to Aleister Crowley in there. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. That's the lemma, which is significantly different from Satanism, considering that while yes, Crowley was a dark motherfucker who didn't have any particular scruples when it came to dealing with lower entities. He wasn't a Satanist. He was just the magical equivalent of a hedonist. He didn't give a fuck about morality or anything apart from what made him feel good at the time. And what made him feel good a lot of the time was reveling in darkness and chaos and so on and so forth. So bring on the Solomonic magic and the Goshic magic and so on and so forth. So I applaud your use of Aleister Crowley in this case show, but also fuck you, even Aleister deserves better than this, because while I don't particularly have any particular passion for Aleister Crowley, he was very skilled at what he did. Like many of the great magic users of the world, it's always the crazies that end up wielding a lot of the power, because it takes a little bit of craziness to part the veil in a lot of cases. When you stare into interdimensional abysses a lot of the time, a little bit of that energy will backfire and infect or influence you as a person, thus altering you. That's why magicians are different after they've practiced magic than before. And of course, when Sabrina realizes she has been rankly lied to, and badly, Blackwood, she gets cold feet, as it were, gets a couple flashes of what it's become, gets some visitation from what is allegedly her ghostly parent apparitions, and then she runs the fuck away, and there's, roughly speaking, the end of the episode. Because of course, Blackwood, you idiot, if you sell someone on X, and then you deliver the opposite of X, they're no longer going to be sold on the proposition of X. Sorry. You eviled wrong. There's a difference between evil and incompetency. If you're competently evil, you could have convinced her of this many times over. But you, sir, are what we like to call incompetently evil. You are a dumbass. Therefore, fuck you, Blackwood, you idiot. I think that's what I might end up calling this episode. Anyway, I believe that's roughly the end of me for this time being, and I will be seeing you all at the next Mystic Juncture. Cheers, everyone. I'll see you all next time.